And we are, as a people, inherently and historically
Wake up!
opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
The show that asks questions about why we don't ask questions.
What the hell is going on?
This is Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. Welcome to... What is it? Yes, Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. These are Conspiracy Queries. And I am Alan Park, and we have a great show today. I'll tell you that much. We have an author who has written a book about some events that took place during World War II, specifically D-Day, and it's called The Cover-up at Omaha Beach, D-Day, the U.S. Rangers and the Untold Story of Mazie Battery. And the gentleman's name is Gary Sterne, and he'll be joining us from France, which is a good place to be if you're going to speak about D-Day. And his book is a fascinating read. Now, I admit I did not read the whole book. I didn't have the time, but I did read a lot of it, and lots of every chapter. And I got a great taste of how important this book is, because a lot of people don't know what's in this book. And yet it should be, history that everybody talks about. They leave it out of a lot of different presentations of what happened at Omaha Beach and the landing. I think you'll find it fascinating when he talks about it and how he came across the information that led him, Gary, the author, to learn of literally well-buried secrets for decades. So he'll be coming up later. But right now, there's a few things on my mind, which is nice, because if you don't have anything on your mind, it can be bad sometimes. Sometimes it's all right, but sometimes it's bad. But, we're doing what we can, ain't we? I hope you're working. I hope you have a job. I hope you're employed, if you want to be, and you need it, because not all of us can get work sometimes, and it's difficult. You can't feed yourself if you can't get work, and it's tough. But not all of us have that problem. For example, Joe Biden, he's the vice president, whatever that means. It means if they don't have a president, this guy'd be the president. So he's pretty close to the president, I would imagine. I'm sure he has him on a first-name basis. And his son, Joe Biden's son, that is named Hunter. And that's appropriate because he's just been appointed the head of legal affairs at the largest private gas producer in, where is it again? It's in, where's this gas producer again? Hang on a minute. The son of Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, appointed the head of legal affairs at the largest private gas producer. Oh, here it is. Ukraine. Well, isn't that some fascinating timing? Wow. Yeah, in a statement published Monday, this is from the Moscow Times. In a statement published Monday on its website, Burisma Holdings, B-U-R-I-S-M-A Holdings, announced Hunter Biden would join its board of directors and head the company's legal unit. Ukraine. Well, isn't that a fortunate timing? Turn of events. Quote, as a new member of the board, I believe that my assistance in consulting the company on matters of transparency. Again, this is the son of the vice president of the United States, which is involved in some crazy shenanigans over there in Ukraine. Matters of transparency, corporate governance, and responsibility. It's like these people just say the exact opposite, and so many other people believe it immediately. It's astounding. Burisma owns several Ukrainian oil and gas companies, including Esko Pivnich, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Pari. Lenta.ru reported Tuesday. The company also has assets in Ukraine's, I'm not going to pronounce that, and guess I'm not going to pronounce that either. But hey, what's going on with these people? More criminality, I guess. Huh, interesting. That's what the Americans are doing. You know what else they're doing? They've got this NSA thing, and I'm coming from Canada here, and we laugh up here. We go, well, we don't have the NSA. That's pretty good. We don't have to suffer along with that stuff. It's just the Americans that have to deal with the NSA. And if I think that, I'm wrong. We learned that with, what's his name, Edward Snowden last year. And whether you're for him or against him, apparently more documents are coming out. And Glenn Greenwald, his buddy, he's got a book about it. And he says Canada is also a very active partner with the NSA and an energetic surveillance force in its own right. That's right here in Canada. Oh, yeah. They're snooping on you all the time. It's incredible. I don't know who doesn't believe this. Must have an easier time getting up in the morning than I do. But there you go. That's what's going on here. We have some people helping out the NSA to snoop on us. And it turns out the federal government is, creeping your Facebook page. Now, this is incredible that the government is creeping you on Facebook. This from the Toronto Star. Yes, I said it. Ooh. The government that characterized the long-form census as unduly intrusive. That's right. The Conservatives got rid of the census because they thought, well, that's an intrusion into people's privacy. We don't even need to know all these facts that'll help us govern better and therefore have to pay more social things than we want to. So let's get rid of that census and tell everybody, well, we don't want to invade their privacy, but then how come they're helping the NSA and sniffing around our Facebook? Well, I hope they're sniffing around mine. There's a treasure trail for you. Stephen Harper, who will probably come back because this man has just crookedly readjusted the election rules so that even though they're not really a majority, but a minority, the only majority in Canada that that Harper's got is all the people that don't vote for him. But he knows that. And that's why they had to change the game. Now we got a conservative guy here in Ontario. This guy, Hudak. Tim Hudak. Hudak guy. He's released his party's campaign platform. And what he wants to do is increase classroom sizes in the schools while reining in education spending, a.k.a. fire the teachers. So bigger classes, oh, sure, that'll be good. He wants to balance the budget, and he's going to create 1 million jobs. 1 million. And you'll believe that because, he said the word change, and he said the word hope. And I think he also said the phrase, time for change, if I'm not mistaken. So he must be telling the truth. This is another politician that's just coming up the pike here who isn't going to lie to us. He wants to change things. He wants to make it different. And he wants to do that by getting rid of teachers and classes. It's amazing what we are still okay with spending money on and what we're not okay with spending money on. We're never having any kind of problems spending money going off to war. But teaching people why they shouldn't go to war, well, we don't have money for that at all. No, sirree. So that's what's going on in the world right now. I couldn't even believe it. But, so these Snowden documents are going to be coming out shortly regarding Canada, and I hope they are pervasive, and I hope they are intense, and I hope they go very, very deep. I can only hope. I don't know that it'll happen. I don't know who they're covering, but I sure hope there is some deep, dark, dirty stuff that we can actually shine a light on, because that stuff is there. It would be nice to have some kind of verifiable confirmation on some of the dirty dealings that these people get up to. I mean, remember, you're talking about people that are no problem going to spend $20 billion to have a G20 conference, which is basically like inviting people all around the world to come over to your party that you've locked down and repaved and put people in jail for protesting. And spending all that money to get exactly the same distance economically further ahead that you could have had with a Telesat conference call or an iPad or two with some of these cats. You don't need to fly all these people around and stick them up in a hotel at our expense. There's no point to it, but we allow it to happen. And so I guess if that's going to happen, there's going to be some dirt. There's going to be some prostitution scandals. And I'm looking forward to those just for the fun of it. Not that that's the most important thing to think about, but just that the dirt that is there, hopefully, will soon have a light on it and connect it to the person that threw it there. And hopefully people will realize, as they have with this Rob Ford character, this other conservative fella. I don't think he has a conservative bone in his body. However, we've learned that lesson with him, and we learn it every time, that there are lies from the government, by the government, to us all the time. And our guest today is going to shine a particularly intense light on a very interesting chapter of history that I hope you will enjoy as much as I enjoyed learning about myself. So we're going to talk with Gary Sterne, and he's in France. Now let's go to our interview. Gary, thanks for joining us. I have to say that I know that when I went to school as a boy, and, I learned certain things about that invasion in Europe. And I also watched war movies to learn things. I saw John Wayne. He was a wonderful actor telling us how great it was and telling us the stories of how the wars went until you found out he never even went to war. He was just making movies.
Hollywood. That's Hollywood for you.
Yeah, he was rewarded with a film career and a tough guy status, and he was really just apparently a very small man. I put my fist inside of his at Grauman's Chinese Theater, and I couldn't fit it in there. And I'm not that big a guy, so hey. But that just confirms to me that our governments tell us lies, and they do cover things up. Now, this blows me away. You have learned something, and I didn't hear about your original discovery. So please tell us, Gary, first, the official story that you learned was upside down by the time you came across your discovery.
Okay, I think it all stems around my interest in Pointe du Hoc, a place called Pointe du Hoc, which is a promontory of land that sticks out between Omaha and Utah Beach. It's a little bit closer to Omaha Beach, but it was at one time in early January 1944 a very dangerous place. It contained 6 very large guns which were capable of firing a long distance out to sea. But the question that I had was that historically that was always the case. The Rangers were briefed to attack the site. There was a big battle which is portrayed quite well in The Longest Day, written by Cornelius Ryan. And in that work, he makes the point when the guys go up the cliff top after the battle or during the battle, they look in one of the casements, the big block houses that carried these guns, and they discover that there's no mounts for the guns. The guns hadn't been fitted yet, and yet all the evidence pointed to there being big guns there because they were the number one target that Eisenhower had said that's the most dangerous position to assault on the whole of the invasion sector. So I probably, like yourself, grew up watching The Longest Day and all these other good films, and I visited Pointe du Hoc many, many times, but every time I picked up a book, I read a different variation of what people, and these are all experts, and I'm not knocking them in any way, but these were all people who I respected in different ways for different pieces of observation and research, and yet they all had a variation on the story. Some people said that the guns had just simply been moved a couple of days before D-Day. Well, that, when I stood on the positions there, I realised that the guns were genuinely missing on D-Day, as we know, because the Rangers all said so. Said that was the case. But when I examined it, you find that there's a big blockhouse that we know is not finished, and it's still not finished if you go and look at it today. But it's built on top of a gun pit that was supposed to house a gun that these guys were sent to attack. So that gun pit didn't have any weapon on it, and you go and look at another one, and there's a blockhouse built in front of a gun pit, which was supposed to house a gun on D-Day. So when you start narrowing all this evidence down, it seemed quite ludicrous to suggest that the guns had just been moved to a field somewhere else, and then somebody else would say, "Oh, well, the guns in the field behind were this," and another book would say, "Oh, they were this," and all these variations of history can't possibly be true. In my opinion, history is an exact science. What happened is what happened. You can have theories about what happened if you don't know, but all the books I was reading were all telling me different versions of exactly what's supposed to happen. So that made me wonder a bit. And when I investigated in the National Archives, both here in the UK and in America, I found that many of the after-action reports written by units landing on the beaches on the first wave, second wave, all the different waves of people portrayed in the Saving Private Ryan film, for example, who were landing on Omaha Beach, many were being shelled by large caliber ammunition from, as they thought, the direction of Pointe du Hoc. And yet, as we've just mentioned, there were no guns at Pointe du Hoc on the morning of D-Day, and certainly not anything that was firing. So this led me to believe that there might be something else in the area. And I just set myself thinking, it just sort of settled in. And then I remembered back some years before, I'd purchased for my own collection a set of uniform pieces, jackets, shirts, trousers, from a veteran in the States. And I remembered that there was a map of this area in his pocket of one of these trousers. So when I was next back home, I collected the trousers, got out the map, and I noticed that on an area of a little bit, about a mile and a quarter away from Pointe du Hoc and about a mile inland, I noticed there was a cross-hatched area that had just been scribbled on by somebody, and it said high resistance area marked onto the map. And I just thought, well, that's a very odd thing to mark on a map. So one day I was over here with my brother, and we decided to go and look at this piece of land just to see if it was just curious, really. And it was a wet winter's day, and we went for a walk across this land. And after about 500 yards of walking through waist-high brush and scrub and tall grass, we came across a square of concrete at ground level. And I assumed instantly that it was the floor of a building that had been demolished during a battle. And as such, it probably was that there had been a battle there, and it had some significance. And as I turned around to go back to the car, I tripped up over a chimney pot. The building was beneath me. It wasn't
a chimney pot.
Level. It was beneath me.
Sorry, what is a Gary? What is a? By the way, are you one of the original Beatles? I'm just kidding.
Sorry, Beatles.
It sounded like it just for a second there. No, you have a northern English accent, I noticed.
I do. I'm from Manchester.
Ah, close, but not right on the money. Okay. Listen, I just wanted to ask you before we get into that stuff, because it's really exciting. Yeah. I just want to give the folks a little bit of background on where you come from, why you would even come up with this stuff. It turns out as you recreate and are involved in the recreation of military interventions, and you co-founded the magazine's Skirmish magazine. Is that right?
Well, I did, but that's quite a long time ago. That and what we call reenactments now have gone a long way. I'm not involved in. I was involved in the publishing of it rather than the reenacting of it, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay, but I just mean you're of that world, and that is kind of why you were in a place where you found uniforms that had this ancient map in there, this hidden map.
Well, I was, and still am a collector of military memorabilia. So I've collected for a long time American uniforms and equipment that relates to D-Day and the Second World War. So that really, I was when I bought the equipment and stuff. I was at a show in Ohio, in the States. So these shows are on all over the world, and you pick up things sometimes which are of interest purely because they fit a space in your collection.
Sure.
But then there are other things that you think, well, this is historically interesting. This is historically important. This is a rare item, something that might have belonged to somebody famous or
some kind of document
part in a famous battle or something. So I've collected probably 30 or 40 years, and I've picked up a lot of interesting things along the way. But the map was really, as a result, a byproduct of the result of me buying something else, really.
Well, that's what I mean, and that's what's fascinating about this, because your nose is kind of already in and around these questions.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was interested enough to have remembered that I had the map somewhere, and sometimes I say this regularly to my son. Sometimes the best things you already have. You just don't know it yet.
That's right, and that's why I often have a garage sale every couple of years and clear some stuff out. You've got a great point in this book, I have to mention, before it even kicks off. And I thought this was going to be the case when I read the title that you've come up with, which is amazing. Just before the first chapter, you write, and I have to agree, and I'm going to quote this: "This book requires the reader to have an open mind, to put aside received wisdom." In other words, what you learned in school. And that wasn't you, that was me. "And adopt a fresh approach to stop thinking in terms of what has been written previously." and consider new ideas. Oh, well, aren't you just calling a high order there? I mean, that is exactly what you need to have to get through your book and to understand it and to even believe it. So congratulations for putting that in there, because I think if folks can't get past that paragraph, there's no sense even reading this thing.
Well, the thing is, the book contains... I went to the States for a number of times, and I interviewed every surviving U.S. Army Ranger who landed on Omaha Beach, all landed at Pointe du Hoc on D-Day. And I started off on the basis that I wanted to know their story and see how it fitted in with my story, and if the two would meet, then I'd got the truth, because I had it from the men's own words, so it wasn't me telling a story that I'd invented.
You're just confirming details and storylines. I understand.
Exactly. I was digging stuff up, and then I'll give you an example. I dug up a huge building about 50 feet long with a 3-meter thick roof on it that was at ground level. And when we dug this building up, the doorways inside had simply been blown off their hinges. A week later, I was in New York. I interviewed a gentleman who lived in New York, a veteran, and he told me, only a week after I dug up the building, that he destroyed the doors on that building, and he told me how he did it. So I was not only digging up part of the past, I'd got the man who did it in front of me telling me how he did it.
That's incredible.
And that's fascinating when you can marry the two up, because it backs up the history and it tells the true story.
Well, what's fascinating to me also is that you got access to this land by purchasing it, or
Yes, I originally, once I'd found the place and I realised that there was something there, we went back with a spade and we had a nosy around, and over a period of a few weeks we found more and more pieces of concrete. So I knew there was something there. We found a tunnel entrance, and we managed to open the tunnel entrance up enough to climb down with torches, and we found a bicycle and ammunition boxes on the floor and all sorts of things scattered about. But it was obvious that it was for ammunition storage. Now, the Germans would not have built something so elaborate in a field that didn't have a purpose. So this set my mind thinking, there's more to this than meets the eye. And then obviously, why was it buried? By who was it buried? Because the local people, when I went to them and said, who owns those fields over there, they'd say, this so-and-so owns these fields. I would knock on the door and I'd say, do you want to sell the field? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, did you put any soil on the land? Did you bury it? No, we never touched it. We only had a horse and cart. We didn't have bulldozers. We didn't have equipment. And everybody I went to approach to buy the land, their pieces, and there was 32 pieces of land I bought eventually. Wow. Every person...
You ever go camping there?
144 acres in size. It's not small. Everyone I spoke to all said, no, we didn't bury it. It was buried when it was given back to us by the Army.
So the Army. So, okay. So people know the secret now. So what happened to you were you just standing there going, I can't believe I'm getting this information?
Exactly. But what was stranger was, I rang, I won't name names, some prominent museums around the world, and a couple of them in the States.
Go ahead and name it.
Specialize in this subject.
Go ahead and name it. We're okay.
And I said to them,
I've never been sued by a museum, and it's not going to start right now. Go ahead and name that museum.
No. And I said, I found a place. I spoke to the head of history in one of these places, and I said, I found a place that I'm convinced was firing on Omaha Beach on the morning of D-Day. Mm-hmm. And the guy said to me, he said, oh yeah, you found Pointe du Hoc. We've already found that. And he put the phone down on me. Wow. Now, a little while later, he apologized for doing that, because he realized he'd been wrong. But I had found something that all these experts, in inverted commas, didn't know existed. And when I've done interviews before, and people have said to me, how can you justify that? Well, I can justify it very easily, because I challenge any of your listeners to go and buy the best book they can find on D-Day, by their favorite author, by the best-selling author, by anyone. Go and find a book that says Maisie exists. And none of them will. And then if they look at the website maisiebattery.com, or they buy the book, they'll suddenly realise that it does very well exist, and it takes you an hour to walk around it, and there's dozens of buildings, trenches, bunkers, tunnels, you name it, all there and being preserved. So it was a cover-up, but we don't know by whom.
So we've just established that this thing had been kept secret deliberately.
Yes.
And so now we have to say by whom and for what reasons.
Well, the Rangers who eventually were tasked with assaulting the site, because they'd come off Omaha Beach and they'd come off Pointe du Hoc and had hard battles in both places, then had to come inland and then again attack what effectively was one of the largest sites of its type, is still one of the largest sites of its type in the invasion area. So they still hadn't finished when they got off the beach. They still had another mission to do. Now, we know that the Rangers left straight away after that battle because they had other things to do. They had to go and attack other places. So another unit came in afterwards, took over the guarding of the prisoners there, and one of those units subsequently was involved in the clearance of the site and then its burial. To this day, I don't know who that was. But the only people with the capability to do so would be the U.S. Army with bulldozers, because when you see the amount of soil we removed, and it was 2, 3, 4 meters in places deep, it's a huge undertaking, and it's not done by men with spades.
No. And for other listeners, a spade is a shovel. We're not talking card games here.
Sorry.
That's okay. No. I just have to translate sometimes, because you said earlier a spade and a nosy around. That means he had a shovel and they were digging.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
Sorry,
okay. No, don't apologize.
My, colloquial English for you.
No. Don't do that. I don't mind translating. I love hearing it. I want to ask you a little bit some more about these Rangers now. What are the Rangers per se? This is some kind of an elite unit. You do go into detail about them in the book, which is wonderful, and you have several interviews with a load of these guys, and they've all got some incredible things to say when you put it all together. So explain to people who the Rangers are. Is this some kind of an elite crack squad, or how did it work with those guys?
Yeah, you've got it in one there. They were, at a time when elite units did not exist, there became a need for an elite unit, and the Rangers were chosen to be that unit. Your general battalion of men was 2,000 or 3,000 men, an infantry battalion with specialist people, but no real emphasis on particular targets and particular missions. So certain, and I'll say intelligent guys, certain guys with more athletic prowess than others, they took the best of the best and trained them hard, fast, and to be even better. And these men were trained alongside the British commandos in Scotland under combat conditions. They were live firing at them. They were doing boat jumps in the middle of boat runs into places in the middle of the night. They were doing day after day after day. They were driven very hard, so that when they landed on the beach, it seemed like another training day for them. Obviously, it wasn't. They were getting mown down. But the idea was that they were a really, really sharp point that would go in as the invasion started, and they would incise into the Atlantic wall that Hitler had created along the coast, and that would allow the rest of the troops to burst out and break out behind them. There's so many special units nowadays. It seems almost commonplace to hear of Navy SEALs or airborne Rangers and so on. But back in the day in 1944, there were no other specialist units. The British had the commandos and the SAS, and the American forces had the Rangers.
All right, so that's and this journey of theirs, this mission that the Rangers had after it was over, as it seemed to end in the official telling of the story. Did that bring them more into the awareness of the average, say, American citizen, the existence of the Rangers and such a thing as an elite unit and someone who actually dreamed up and called for the creation of an elite squad? And, of course, that has been something that continues to this day.
That's right. The elite unit status has stayed with the Rangers, and you have Ranger units now of all types that are fighting all over the world wherever they're needed. But in the day, they were a very specialist unit, and I've interviewed people in England who remember them coming to certain towns like Bude in Cornwall, for example, And even then they were given, I wouldn't say special treatment, but people were in awe of them because they'd heard about them and they'd heard that the Rangers were a top unit. And then to see them in the flesh and see them training and stuff, training hard and much harder than a lot of the other units, that brought a lot of respect certainly from the English towards them. But I do think personally, from a historical perspective, a lot of the Rangers' efforts have gone untold. Maisie being an exact example of that. Here's a big battle that 500, 600 men took part in, and yet it's wiped. I'd say wiped. It's lost in the mists of time for whatever reason, and a lot of the Rangers' efforts have been lost over the years, and yet they were the best of their best in the day. But we can't forget, Saving Private Ryan depicts these men landing on Omaha Beach in a very vivid way.
Mm-hmm. It's very well done. It seemed real to me. I mean, I've never been there, but boy, that looked real.
Well, every veteran inevitably it comes up in conversation with veterans, and when I've met these guys, and they're in their late 80s onwards now,
mm-hmm.
and when you talk to them and you say to them, what do you think of that film? And they'll all say, it's the most accurate thing I've ever seen.
Whoa, that's a pretty good endorsement then.
They were there, and it brings back vivid memories for them.
Now, I have to say about the memories of these guys. Now, everybody that you obviously spoke with in the book is, as you say, in their 80s or 79 at the youngest. And it's amazing to me that this terrible stuff, this business of war that goes on, it is that horrible because people that are that old often have memory problems. But, of course, with something so horrendous happening in such formative years of your life, it's fascinating that you can get such a great retelling with such sharp, crystal clear memories that what happened to those guys, and they can just turn around like almost 100 years later and say exactly the way it went down. That's amazing.
Well, I think that 99% of the guys I spoke to all had very clear remembrances of the time. Some not so much, but they told me what they could remember, which was they couldn't remember everything, and nobody can. But they told me things, and one guy summed it up very well. He said he trod on a mine at Maisie, and the mines were designed. The Germans put them all across the fields, and the mines were designed to pop up in the air to waist height and then explode sideways. So they were meant to knock down 2, 3, 4 guys in one go.
Oh, instead of the one on the floor that just blows up on the ground when you take your foot off of it.
No, they're called bouncing betties. They bounce up into the air and then go off at the waist height to cause the maximum problem.
That sounds like a real...
The Germans used these all over the place, but this is the sort of thing the Rangers had to walk through minefields. They had no metal detectors with them. They just had to get on with the job, and the job involved going through this. And I spoke to one gentleman on the phone one time, and he said to me, I don't really remember too much about Maisie. And then he said, yes, I do. And he recounted the instance. He was advancing towards the German positions, and he touched his toe on the top of a mine, and the mine bounced up and didn't go off.
Wow.
And when it didn't go off, I said, wow, that's incredible. What did you think? And he said, it stuck in my mind that much I can tell you about it 65 years later.
I guess so, because he thought he was surprised to still be standing there 2 seconds later.
He was gone, as many of the guys were when they met that circumstance. But he said, I couldn't forget that. He told me what the weather was like, how he was standing, what was happening. He remembered it all perfectly. And the point I'm making is that if you were to go onto Omaha Beach, or any of us, in the circumstances that these guys did, can you imagine how vividly that's embedded in your head?
Yeah. Well, no.
So when you ask these guys about their memories are crystal clear very often, because it was so astonishing to them that the memories are. It's almost written into them, like it's hardwired into them.
I find that fascinating that the brain can and will, do that in such a situation. But it's also very saddening that those guys got to experience such an acute sense memory after all those decades, because the initiating event is so horrible overall.
Well, that's right, and I think everybody who goes through war probably suffers a similar thing. But we all have to remember that without the efforts of the Rangers to break out from the beaches, and without the efforts of the men who followed them, we may be. We have a saying in England: if they hadn't have done what they did, we'd be speaking German now. And they fought to free the world from the tyranny that was going on. So we shouldn't let these guys down. And one of my aims was to try and tell their story completely, because I found a piece that had been missed out of their history. So it was about telling the Rangers' story completely. And if that upsets a few historians who've written a book that says this didn't happen, then so be it. But I think in the future most books will include Maisie, and most films will include Maisie, because it's a story that needs to be told. Well, it's been told now, but
I'm sure there's a screenplay humming along right now somewhere. I mean, it's a great story.
Well, there's a lot of factors as well. There was an awful lot of money found at the site, because it was the headquarters for the regional payroll of the German army, and that money disappeared somewhere along its way to the beach. And there's a lot of good stories around it, within it. But the major core of the story is one that really has never been told before. As somebody said to me the other day, if they make a Saving Private Ryan Part 2, this is what those guys did in reality next.
Right.
And it is. You could take the characters off the beach there, and then they'd go to Maisie, because that's what they did in reality, and there's a whole film in that.
Who affected you the most profoundly in your time interviewing these fellas that are now so old and telling you these stories? Who impressed you the most with some kind of impact that they felt, and did anyone relate to you? This is great that you are asking me these questions, because I've read the history books and I've heard things, and this whole Maisie thing has never come up, and I lived it, and it was hellish, and I had to kill a guy, and I can't believe this is ignored so much in the mainstream, and I'm so glad you're doing this. Did you get anybody kind of expressing that type of relief?
I have to say, everybody I asked was happy to tell me, because they wanted it told. So I'll give you two specific examples. One was more or less at the start of it for me. I'd written to the Ranger Veterans Association asking if anybody had any remembrances of a battle at a place called Maisie. And I asked that there was 2 battalions of the Rangers who landed in Normandy. And I wrote to the head of the 2nd Battalion of the Rangers, and I got a nice letter back saying, I'm terribly sorry, none of our members know anything about this place called Maisie. Perhaps you should ask the men from the 5th Battalion. So I wrote a letter again to the person in charge of the 5th Battalion's association, and then I got a letter back from a gentleman called Jack Burke, and he just wrote a very simple letter saying, great to hear from you, I know all about the battle at Maisie, phone me. And it was like opening Pandora's box when I spoke to him, because he knew so much about all of this, to the extent where I said to him, right, when can you get on a plane? I'll fly you over here, and I want you to talk me through the battle, and I want you to walk me through the fields. I obviously was semi-skeptical about Jack and his remembrances in the first instance, so I said to him, I'm just going to drive you around the coastline of Normandy where we were for a few minutes. And in actual fact, I drove him around for 20 minutes, and I said to him, just shout out whenever you hear or see or you recognise anything that you remember. And eventually, I drove down from an obscure direction. I drove down this lane, and he said, "Stop the car. It's just over that hill there." And he was spot on. And it said to me, he hadn't made anything up, he knew exactly where he was. And from then on, we got out of the car, we walked to the ground, we talked about what went on, who'd shot at him, how people were wounded either side of him, who he'd been tending. He was a medic on D-Day, and he'd been tending people. And absolutely fascinating story came out of that. And then he said, you need to talk to this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. And it just went from there, and it opened up a whole world of people who told me their own piece of a big jigsaw. And the site is so big that each series of people that I spoke to had attacked it from a different place. So they had a completely different battle. So you'd got one guy going into a headquarters and finding stacks and stacks of money in bundles, and German officers guarding it. And then another guy, he went into an office where it was full of radios, and all the radios were still chattering away as though people were trying to talk to the headquarters. And then another guy was in a dispensary, and they captured some German officers who were medics, and the medics were asked could they help the Rangers wounded, which they did, and as the German wounded came in, they all ended up helping with the wounded. So everybody I spoke to had a different story, and putting it together was fascinating. It was an absolute dream for me to do, because not only had I got the land where these incidents had happened, I'd also got the guys telling me in their own words what they did on that land.
Wow, that is amazing. This will be a movie. I predict.
Well, maybe. Let's hope so.
I predict. Have you shopped it around as an idea? I mean, this book is great.
I haven't done anything with it yet. To be honest, I've had so much interest in it from all over the world since the book's only come out in the States today, but it's been out in Europe for a few weeks. And I've been doing stuff all the time. I've been filming. I've been doing other stuff, filming for documentaries and news people and stuff. But no, a film, if somebody doesn't pick it up for a film, they're mad, because it's probably the best untold D-Day story they're ever going to find that nobody's seen.
And as we've heard, Private Ryan is such a great film. It would have to be at least that good or better, to do that over again.
The story for Private Ryan, a percentage of it was made up, whereas if you did this story, it's not made up.
Right.
It's all true.
Exactly. Now let's get into the some of the cover-up aspect of this. How has it been kept a secret for so long, and you were fortunate enough to find this map? What if you didn't find that map? What if you didn't buy those clothes that time, those uniforms?
Well, this is a strange thing. If I hadn't have done, it would have stayed buried. Unquestionably, it would have stayed. And over time, people would have built houses on little parts of it, and fields would have had horses on them or something. It would have been developed, and eventually it would have disappeared and vanished, and nobody would have put the story together, I don't think. Maybe I was lucky at the right time in the right place. Just as I've started to find the veterans, I've also started to find the evidence from the U.S. National Archive, because they're slowly releasing documents from 60 and 70 years ago now. So all of a sudden you can find dozens of documents that mention Maisie, but a year ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, there was nothing. So I've done it, really. The documentation is backing up what I've said, and I've put a lot of it now in the book, because as I found it, it went in the book, and it corroborates what the Navy were doing, what the RAF were doing, what the US Air Force were doing, and what everybody else was doing to try and stop this site firing at the beaches once they knew it was there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, not exactly, thankfully, but yes, I think I do. Yeah, that's an incredible time. I mean, this book... Folks, you got to see this thing. You got to check it out. It's the Cover-up at Omaha Beach. Now, with that in mind, do you think that this kind of decision making to sort of quash these facts comes up all the time? Some of the things that apparently WikiLeaks and or Julian Assange has authorized the release of in modern times, and other people sort of involved in military goings-on that they leave as secret as possible, such as this story. Do you have any insight on any of that kind of thing going on in modern times?
Well, I don't in modern times, because to be honest, my focus is back in his historical one, and always has been. But somebody asked me the same question earlier today, and one answer, I'm not saying it's the answer, but one answer is... at a time when D-Day was in full flow, and we didn't know whether we had a foothold in Europe or not, we didn't know what Hitler was going to do to repel us, we didn't know whether we were there for 5 minutes, 5 weeks, 5 days, 5 years. And I wonder whether sometimes cover-ups like this one are done for the greater good. I don't know whether that perhaps to cover something up that might have been an issue at the time can be dealt with later, but the morale and the greater good is served by the advancement of everybody going forward with a single mind and not worrying about things that have gone before. And I think it's only with hindsight and with sort of historical clinicism almost, where you're studying a particular subject, you can look at it historically and say, well, why did they make this decision? Why did they cover this up? Why did they hide this? But I think when war's in full flow, I think that's possibly an excuse. I'm not saying it's the excuse, but it's possibly the excuse to warrant. So this was a problem. Look, forget about it. We've got a bigger one coming up the road.
That statement right there, that to me, that's an atom bomb. Because on the one hand, I thoroughly understand what you're saying, and I 100% agree with you. However, if someone uses that fact to their advantage, such as an errant CIA or an errant Pentagon. They could just say that all the time, and they do. Well, national security, we can't talk about that. They just trot that thing out all the time, and it helps them get away with crimes. So while it is legitimate, it's also frightening.
Well, I suppose it is. Yeah, I mean, I don't. As I say, I don't have any modern involvement really with the military, so I don't know whether that's is prevalent or not. But I think there will be, I think, more occurrences, certainly from wars that have gone before, whether it's Vietnam, Korea, or it's the Second World War, where evidence suddenly comes up and contradicts completely the known, as I said before, the perceived history of what happened, and that's been the case with this episode on with my experiences of D-Day. I found information out which I put in the book, which every single other book is saying something completely different happened. So I know that this area has been manipulated or has been pushed to one side in favour of a different light. But it might only be done for the greater good, as as we've said. Yeah.
As you close the book with Chapter 11, Challenging a D-Day Myth. So that's what this book certainly does. And if you're interested in what's going on with the history of this particular incident, it's a fascinating read, I have to say. Now, just before we go, Gary, thanks for coming on. And do you have a handle, as they say in the Twitter world, where folks can get a hold of you if they have questions or points they want to bring towards you?
Yeah, we do have a Facebook account, which is Maisie Battery Normandy, and I have my email address is gary@maisiebattery.com, and we have a website, maisiebattery.com, where people can go and look at some of the photographs of the digging we've done and the things we've found and some of the history and stuff. So if you just Google Gary Sterne, Maisie Battery, you'll find a way of communicating with me. And equally, I'm always interested in talking to people who might be able to expand my knowledge on D-Day or my knowledge of the Rangers and or D-Day events. So anybody out there, if you've got any photographs of Rangers or any documents or any badges, anything at all that might add to the history, I'd love to hear from you.
Gary's a willing taker. Well, thanks very much, Gary. I appreciate you coming on the show today.
All right, thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. Please offer comments or complaints by emailing conspiracyqueries@gmail.com or on Twitter @con_queries or at our website, conspiracyqueries.com. Thanks for listening.